Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your delicious lunch and made some great new friends and connections that you can continue to maintain contact with and to grow and to learn with beyond these 2 days at the conference. My name is Lauren Stafford. I have been driving tech into Australia's capital-intensive industries for the past 10 years, specifically the mining industry. And it's my very great pleasure to be here to chair today's sessions for the next couple of hours. And today it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, Julie Inman-Grant. Julie is Australia's e-safety commissioner, and in this role she leads the world's first and still only government agency committed to keeping its citizens safer online. Julie has spent 2 decades working in senior public policy and safety in the tech industry at organisations such as Microsoft, Twitter, and most recently Adobe. So I'd like to welcome Julie to the stage to present on baking it in, not bolting it on, promulgating the ethos of safety by design.
All right. Oh, I like having my own soundtrack. That's great. I go by Tweetin' Jules on Twitter, because that's very professional when you're not serving in a government capacity. In any case, it's really a pleasure to be here. As Lauren said, I've been working alongside or in the technology industry for more than 28 years. I started out in Washington, D.C. in the early 1990s with big ideals and even bigger hair. It was the 90s after all. And I worked for my hometown congressman on issues at the intersection of social policy and technology before there was an internet. In 1995, I moved on to Microsoft for 17 years as one of their first government relations professionals, right before the United States Department of Justice sued Microsoft on antitrust charges. So I'm feeling a little bit of deja vu right now when we consider the market concentrations of power by what I call the GAF. Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook. And it will really be fascinating to see how both the ACCC recommendations play out here, as well as the US Department of Justice probe into antitrust power there. So I was very lucky to be working at the intersection of social policy, tech, and safety in the mid-1990s, and these were significant times. This is me with President Clinton. I worked with him and others on one of the first White House summits on online safety in 1996, as well as a landmark legislation I'll talk a little bit about called the Communications Decency Act. After my 17 years at Microsoft, I had some really insightful professional experiences at both Twitter and Adobe. And then for the past 2.5 years, I've landed in what I would describe as my most rewarding and challenging role ever as Australia's e-safety commissioner. But what I learned in the mid-1990s stays largely true to this day. From fledgling startups to major global corporations, the underlying ethos of the tech sector is it just wants to be left alone by government. And since the mid-1990s, governments have largely been on board with that philosophy, not wanting to put a policy handbrake on things or stifle innovation and to really stimulate the economic promise that the internet brought. And this was most evident in the US government's adoption of what we call Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was passed in 1996. And I was one of the people from the industry side that helped shape that legislation because we truly believed at that time if Congress overregulated the internet, it would stifle its growth and potential in that fledgling stage. So what Section 230 did, of course this was before there was any social media, was it gave intermediary immunity to these companies. So it basically said, we are going to give you a safe harbor and a free pass. You will not be responsible for anything that anybody uses on your platform. Well, fast forward 2 years later, we know what the risks are. They've been around for a long time, whether you're talking about online harassment, child sexual abuse material, online grooming, sextortion, you name it. These risks have been around for a long time, and the policy pendulum is definitely swinging back the other way, with governments trying to figure out now, once you have this tremendous market power, how do we ratchet this back and get companies to start taking responsibility for what's happening on their platforms? So it's going to be a very interesting time to watch this all play out. And I really feel that the technology sector is coming to a place where it really has to change. But in any case, I'm very honored to be here because it is those incredible female pioneers like Grace Hopper that are the reason I am speaking to a room full of largely women. When I joined Microsoft, I was in my mid-20s and single, and we at the time, the proportion of men to women at the company was 70% men to 30% women. So we single gals used to say, well, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. The sad thing is today the odds are still the same. Not that I'm saying that there's oddities, but what I'm saying is the proportion of men to women more than 20 years later still is around 70% men to 30% women. And when you look in areas like cybersecurity, it's still 90% men. So we need to do better. Now, that's not the subject of my talk. But there is a nexus to my subject, which is safety by design. And the reason being is that what is required to really shift the proportion here and make real systemic change is going to take leadership at the top. And frankly, I think that's what we haven't seen to date, and we need to see more of. Despite all this background, I do want to let you know that I am a technology optimist at heart. And I do believe in the continued ability of technology to connect us, to enrich us, and that the benefits do ultimately outweigh the risks. And this is a real risk in our space, is there's a lot of scaremongering and doomsday scenarios, which causes people, particularly parents, to turn off and to shut down. 94% of Australian parents have told us that this is the parenting issue of our time, but telling them that their children are going to be taken away by predators causes either a flight or a fight mechanism, an amygdala hijack, if you will. And so we need to be honest about what the benefits are, what the risks are, but then give people actual tools to be able to mitigate those risks. And that's what we try and do at the eSafety office. And that's why we were established in 2015, 4 years ago, to do just that. As Lauren said, we're still the only government agency in the world that is solely dedicated to looking after their citizens' online safety. Although I've been speaking to governments in Ireland, the UK, Canada, and elsewhere who are looking at building similar models. And I expect over the next 10 years, these issues are becoming so fundamental and so important, there'll be a network of commissioners or regulators like myself, just as there are data protection authorities. Just to tell you a little bit about what we do, obviously prevention is, and we've got our own research team, so we make sure that we're developing an evidence base and developing audience-based awareness and education materials. But we have 3 regulatory schemes or reporting lines. The first deals with youth-based cyberbullying. So that we regulate the social media sites. So if a young person is seriously cyberbullied, and that's defined as seriously harassed, threatened, intimidated, or humiliated, and they report it to the social media site and it doesn't come down, we serve as a safety net, and young people or their parents or educators can come to us. We will basically negotiate on their behalf because there is an inherent power balance that exists between the big technology behemoths and the users. We also operate a complaints service for image-based abuse, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and that's the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. We've helped thousands of people remove content, nude images and videos from more than 150 platforms, mostly based overseas. We have a 90% success rate in doing so, and we have new strong civil powers to go after bad content hosts as well as perpetrators themselves. And for 20 years, we've been operating an online content scheme. So last year, our cyber report deemed 13,000 investigations into illegal content, including 8,000 into child sexual abuse material. And then more recently, in the wake of the Christchurch live-streamed tragedy, we've been given new powers to issue notification schemes for what is called abhorrent violent content. So any content that is hosted or streamed of rape, murder, torture, you name it. This is why people don't invite me to barbecues, because I kill the conversation. Indeed, we also have targeted programs, which I'll talk to you about. Not surprisingly, both our research and our regulatory experience shows that women are disproportionate targets of cyber abuse. More than 2/3 of complaints about all forms of cyber abuse, including image-based abuse, are directed at women. And it won't surprise any of you to know that most of the online harassment or abuse directed at women tends to be much more sexualized, gendered, targeted, and violent. And that's really because there is a strong nexus underpinning the inequality and discrimination we see online with the sad underbelly of the human condition that lurks underneath. So this is a reflection of misogyny. We also know that this online targeted harassment is intersectional. So women based on not only gender, but age, disability or ability, race, LGBTIQ, all of these factors can further serve to entrench discrimination and increase the level of harassment. So, as I said, as the technology optimists, we believe strongly in the power of social media to promote voices, but we need to make sure that we're finishing the equation and protecting those voices as we go along. And that is why we've developed a number of women's programs and initiatives that are aimed at helping women take back control. One of these programs is called eSafety Women, not terribly ingenuitive, but the program itself is, we've reached more than 10,000 domestic and family violence workers with face-to-face training. We know that 98% of women who are experiencing domestic and family violence are also at risk of being surveilled, harassed, or stalked online as well. So 98% in almost all cases. Now, while the vast majority of this technology-facilitated abuse is low-tech, so harassing, threatening text messages, tracking through GPS, or setting up imposter accounts on social media, we know that IoT devices are increasingly being used to control, stalk, and harass women as well. And this is no surprise, given that the average Australian household has 17 interconnected IoT devices in the home now, and that promises to explode. So a couple of examples that come to mind that we've heard from victims. One woman couldn't drive her car further than 5 kilometers from her home without it stalling. The mechanics couldn't figure it out, but of course, so much of cars these days are computerized, and it turned out that her former partner programmed it as a way to keep her from going too far away from home. Another ex-partner programmed the smart TV to leave menacing messages to his ex-partner and their children whenever they turned on the TV. So obviously they weren't doing a lot of Netflix. I think about how thermostats are now controlled remotely, digital locks on our doors. We've seen tons of examples. Surveillance devices are this big. They've been put on teddy bears in the lining of purses, under shoes. So there are millions of ways that technology can be misused, and it will never cease to amaze me the ingenuity that a determined perpetrator can use to make sure that technology is misused. But removing technology from the equation isn't helpful or even practical as automation continues to grow. And we know that in many of these situations, technology serves as a lifeline for these women, particularly those who are escaping across state lines with their families. It's a way that they can stay connected to their friends and family, support services, police, a way of having a bit of consistency and normalcy, in terms of lives that are disrupted so disturbingly in other ways. So what these programs aim to do is empower women so that they can diagnose, they can learn how to set up the technology safely, know what red flags to look for, but still be empowered with the use of technology. We also play a crucial role in the fight against image-based abuse. When I was announced to take up this role, my first task was to set up this revenge porn reporting tool and portal. And the first thing I said was, and I actually got into a fight with folks in the government about this, I'm not calling this revenge porn. Revenge for what? For being in what you think at one point is a trusted relationship. And I wanted to make sure that we moved away from a lexicon that lends itself to victim blaming. So when Tracy Grimshaw at A Current Affair starts calling it image-based abuse, that you've made some impact in terms of changing the language. Now we need to work on changing the practices. Because we know that 1 in 10 Australians overall has experienced some form of image-based abuse. Think about that, 1 in 10, 2.4 or 2.5 million people. But again, when you look at the intersectional factors, 1 in 4 women between the ages of 18 to 25 has experienced image-based abuse. 1 in 4 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. If you suffer from an intellectual disability or you identify as LGBTIQ, you're also at a much higher likelihood to experience image-based abuse. And we know that only 1 in 4 victims actually do anything about it. I just spent about a half hour doing an interview about sextortion, which is becoming all the more common. We've got 12 and 13-year-olds who are meeting who they think is their new boyfriend online. It happens the same way. It's replaced the Nigerian scams. It's very lucrative, and they're patient, but it doesn't take that long to develop the trust of a preteen who doesn't have the cognitive ability or the life experience to really know that the person behind that imposter account may not be who they say they are, and that their intent might not be sound or genuine, because sexting is becoming much more of a courtship ritual for young people these days. But the minute that an image or a sexy Skype that they're asked to do is delivered, they're immediately asked to pay for money. So our guidance is don't pay. There are different scams every week. Last week it was 2 days to pay, which was a way to engender a sense of panic in people and make them pay. We've had people come to us who've been making monthly payments of up to $10,000 cumulatively over the course of a year because someone has their images or their videos and threatens to share with their friends, families, and colleagues. And of course, those of you in the room who deal with technology know that once an image or a video is out there online, even though we've got a 90% success rate in terms of getting these down, if you've got a determined predator, you're talking about a game of whack-a-mole. And some of the reports we've had come into our office have up to 300 different URLs that we're investigating and trying to initiate takedown on. So that leads us to safety by design. I don't think there's any dispute that any tech company developing social media apps or IoT devices or AI products to digitally alter an image or video need to better assess risk and take responsibility for how their products and services might be misused, engineering the potential misuse at the beginning. And that's what leads me to safety by design. In my years at Microsoft, I was within a division called Trustworthy Computing. We did security by design and privacy by design on every product and service review. But I couldn't encourage them to extend that to safety by design. Yet we know that the risks are real and they've been documented over time. And so I believe that safety by design, which seeks to embed risk assessment and building protections into the design, development, and deployment technologies, is fundamental if we're going to harden the platforms and the internet of the future to prevent really bad things from happening rather than retrofitting fixes afterwards. And I think of it this way. You know, when we get into our cars, we almost take for granted that the brakes will work, that the seatbelts will be effective, and that the airbags will deploy. It's actually taken 100 years since the Model T Ford first came off the assembly line to develop all these standards and mandates that guide car safety standards, and they are guided internationally. You know, safety is built in by design. Why shouldn't we expect the same from our technology companies as we're navigating the internet? Why shouldn't we be building these standards in at the get-go? I believe the challenge is that the internet was not built for safety, it was built for speed. We all know about the adage to just move fast and break things. Well, I do think things are really well and truly broken. And as e-safety commissioner, I see casualties on the internet every day. 1 in 5 Australian children are cyberbullied. 1 in 4 teenagers is approached by a stranger online. And as I said, 1 in 5 Australian women have been victims of image-based abuse. These harms are real, and I do believe the time for change is now, and the path is safety by design. Now, this is going to require companies to fundamentally change the ethos of how they develop and deploy technology. But I think it's eminently achievable. Again, back to my earlier theme, what it will take is leadership and investment and innovation and foresight and creativity and discipline, all of which the technology industry has in spades. We just need the will. So we've spent the last year working with industry, about 30 companies, from the large companies to the small companies, parents, carers, educators, advocates, academics, to come up with a framework and a series of principles that are actionable, achievable, and will be effective. What I said to the companies is, I want to do this with you, not to you, because I think that's important to make sure that there is buy-in and that this gets done. A critical part of that, it was consulting with young people themselves. And as tech developers, engineers, CEOs, and students, I know you probably also believe that co-design or hearing the voices from young people is critical to the work that we do. It's not only because they have the right to be heard, but it's only if we can really understand the risks they're facing, the support that they need to truly stay safe online, and the solutions that they will utilize when we stop and listen to them. So we did a 5-day intensive workshop with about 100 young people from various parts of the country, demographics, socioeconomic backgrounds. And the resounding theme that young people told us is that they want to have a greater control over their online experiences. They want to have more autonomy and transparency from the platforms and services they use and spend their time. And I think this is what we should all expect for them. So there's a stunning vision statement by young people that's part of our Safety by Design framework. I'm just going to quickly go over the 3 major sets of principles and talk through some examples, just so I can make this tangible for you. The first is around service provider responsibility, and that really centers on the preventative steps that can be taken to ensure that known and anticipated harms have been evaluated by the companies in the design and the provision of services. And the point of this principle is to prevent the burden of safety as falling solely upon the end user. And let me just provide you with the 2 tangible examples. These things are happening, and part of what we do throughout the Framework and Principles Guide is we try and surface up a range of good practice notes. to show how companies are really doing some of these things, but they still tend to be piecemeal rather than systematic. So, of course, we're seeing rapid advancements of AI and machine learning that now mean tools and features can be used to flag to a user that their behavior or interactions are against community standards before content is posted. So you've probably seen the prompts. Have you thought about whether or not you want to post this or not? And it will be interesting to see how much this is being taken up and actually changing behaviors. Another example includes the use of hybrid human-machine moderation systems to identify users in acute distress. Most of the major platforms are using AI to detect and surface this stuff, but human moderation is still used in most cases because the machines still aren't trained to pick up culture and context, even different skin tones at times. A really important example of a technology that was developed over probably 12 years ago is photo-DNA, which can automatically detect and remove child sexual abuse material from platforms. And that's being extended to both video and now in terms of digital fingerprinting for deep fakes and other pieces of AI content. So the idea here, again, is to ensure that users aren't exposed to illegal or harmful content. The second design principle is around user empowerment in technology, and we believe that these should be supported, amplified, and strengthened in service design. And so that users can be provided with easy-to-find, intuitive tools to take a bit of a degree of safety into their own hands according to what their needs are. There are numerous examples of how this is being done through safe mode filters. But equally in terms of communicating to users about what type of behaviors are acceptable on common platforms. When I was at Twitter, another example was a 3 strikes rule that they instituted, so that as users violate the rules, they're told about it, they have to take proactive action to be allowed back on the platform. So they know what they're doing is wrong, and then you've got strike 2 or strike 3 results in ultimate account removal. And there are more nuanced tools that are being built, which uses behavioral signals to identify users who are targeting others with abuse and harassment so that their posts can be delisted, muted, or removed altogether. And of course, the third principle covers transparency and accountability, which are hallmarks of a robust approach to user safety. It's great to see that more companies are, forming advisory boards to get experts to advise them and putting out transparency reports. But I would say that a lot of the transparency that we're seeing now is more selective transparency rather than radical transparency, which I really think we need to see. So again, you can download the Safety by Design frameworks and principles. We tried to make it as engaging as possible with lots of stats and graphics and all that good stuff. But I'm telling you all this. I'm hoping that those of you in this room see that this is not a radical idea, but it's an idea whose time has come. We need to change the culture of how we develop and design products by putting safety, human rights, ethics at the center, at the core of product development. And I do believe that those of you in this room can take this back to your employers. You can utilize these principles in your own development. And we have a phase 2 of the process so that we can not only make sure that this is actionable and achievable through the development of safety impact assessments from the large players, but if you're a developer, a small developer developing something in your apps in your garage or developing an online game, we can provide you with a checklist about things to think about, whether it's just a basic terms of service, how you deal with harassment, a range of things that can be done. But that's where we really need to mature. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention.
Julie, thank you so much for that talk. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly feel just safer, frankly, knowing that we've got this leadership and talent and competency that is kind of that line of defence that we need. And it's an amazing thing that we have that talent here in Australia. It was a really engaging talk, Julie. Thank you. I saw lots and lots of faces, no heads down on their tech, so that's a good indication of the quality of what we saw there. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Lauren Stafford. I work for a company called Quantum Tech Exchange, and I've been working on driving technology into Australia's capital-intensive industries for the past 10 years, most notably the minerals industry. And it's my very big privilege today to introduce to you Dr. Anne Ottenbreit-Leftwich and also Dr. Carol Fletcher. Anne is an Associate Professor of Instructional Systems Technology in the School of Education and Adjunct Professor of Computer Science at Indiana University. And Carol is at the University of Texas, Austin, and an expert in computer science education. I'll give Anne to hand it over to the panel today to take us through Google Computer Science Education Research Grants and an overview of their portfolio for 2018-19.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We're going to share with you several the kind of state of CS education research, and hopefully there'll be some of you out there who are interested in pursuing these fields as well. And then we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into a couple of the research projects that we're working on with the support of Google. So we did get here on Sunday, and on Monday we had a chance to go to the koala sanctuary. So we had to include these pictures because that was worth the flight over to cuddle with a koala. But as she said, I am the director of the Expanding Pathways in Computing, or EPIC project, at the Texas Advanced Computing Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And
I'm Anne Leftwich. I work with pre-service and in-service teachers to implement computer science education at the K-12 level.
In 2018, Google commissioned a study of kind of the status of CS education, and Paolo Blickstein, one of the conclusions of this study was that we really needed to have education research that was bringing together sectors both from education and computer science, and that was really focused on equity and coordinating that research agenda across a broad range of topics. And when they also brought together about 30 CS education researchers from around the country, we spent 3 days in Mountain View discussing where the gaps were in CS education research. And so worked with Google to develop these priority areas for funding. And so if there are folks out here, how many people out here actually do CS education research right now? Anyone out here that's working in that field right now? Okay. Folks that work with classroom teachers to build teacher capacity in computer science. Okay. Higher ed in general, folks in higher ed. And then how about industry? All right, very good. So there aren't very many people working in CS education research here, and it's the same thing in the US. It's a very new field. And so there are a lot of opportunities. The great thing about it being a new field is it's also a super collaborative field. We work with computer science professors, people working in policy, folks like us coming from an education background. And so I hope that some of you will find interest in some of these topic areas, like these funding priorities here. We need to find out more about how do we teach computer science concepts to students? How do we measure performance in computer science? How do we develop readiness at the primary grades in computer science and computational thinking? How do we measure and evaluate the work that we're doing? How do we prepare teachers, both in service and pre-service? And really, really importantly, how do we ensure that we maintain access and broaden participation in computer science education?
So the CSER, which is Computer Science Educational Research Grants, this program was established as a partnership between basically educational researchers and Google to try and figure out how do we better support classroom practices, how do we support scientific research, and then also how do we disseminate those results in a way that can be consumed.
And that's why we're here today, to help disseminate some of that work.
So what they've set up is 5 to 7 grants per year, and these range from $50,000 to $150,000. And it's meant to be a startup so that you can get initial ideas and then be able to take that for larger funding. And criteria is included exemplary research design, collaboration, scalability. What could you do? How could you take this to a broader level? Whether or not it could be measured, and equity outcomes, and then again, detailed dissemination. How do we get all of this information out to individuals?
And so we are in our first cohort of groups, and we're not going to go through the details, but essentially we've got around 5 projects that have been funded this year, and we're all working collaboratively, and so that's part of what makes this grant process somewhat special.
And so each year what happens is it's really developed with partnerships. So we've met on a monthly basis online to talk about what our projects look like, what things we're struggling with, what are some more creative ways to measure different ways in which our projects are impacting both students and teachers. And then some of the other ones that we've also looked at is like dissemination. How can we think outside the box, especially for educational researchers? How do we reach a broader population in order to really get our message across? And what will end up happening is Cohort 1, which Carol and I are part of Cohort 1, which is ending here very shortly in September. So Cohort 2, which I'm also a part of Cohort 2, Cohort 1 will mentor Cohort 2. Maybe I'll mentor myself, I don't know.
All right, so the first project we're going to talk about is from Harvard, and Anne's going to give you a brief overview of that one.
Yeah, so for the 3 projects that aren't here today, Carol and I are just going to provide a really quick overview, but we're happy to provide you with contact information. The first one is really looking with a team from Harvard led by Karen Brennan, and they wanted to look at how are CS teachers assessing creativity, because we often hear about Hello World is the first thing that everybody goes in and prints. Also looking at the K-12 space for us, it tends to be more of block-based coding where where kids are almost like gaming. And so how do we really think about creative spaces? So in order to do this, they started with a literature review to see how is creativity actually assessed in other disciplines and domains, and then decided to interview 80 teachers and ask them to bring in how they're assessing creativity in their computer science classes, and interviewed them and talked about that particular artifact. And then after that, kind of related those 2 things together. What they hope there is going to come from this is an actual rubric that can be used to assess creativity. And what they found in their results were threefold in terms of teachers assessing content knowledge or conceptual knowledge, so like what is a loop, what is a variable, then also looking at the process that people use, so what are the computational strategies, whether it was drafts and iterations, things like that, and then the social dynamics, how are they interacting with others. They also found that teachers are assessing creativity in computer science in a variety of ways. Some of these assessments are done with different people at a variety of different times, as well as in different formats. So they're looking at creating a rubric that can encapsulate all of those different things to help guide teachers.
And we think that's super important because, as you've probably heard at this conference, if we want to broaden participation in computer science, we have to approach the way we teach computer science in you guys would call it primary and secondary schools, we say K-12, but we have to approach it to emphasize the creative aspects of computer science. But if we don't help teachers understand then how to assess those, they're far less likely to actually do it in their classes because teachers have to find ways to assess their students.
And the way in which we actually try and put emphasis on things, we have to measure those as well.
Right. Then our next project is an e-textiles project out of the University of Pennsylvania and Utah State University, Yasmin Kafai and Deborah Fields. And this e-textiles project, once again, the idea being integrating art and e-textiles into coding and programming. And the way that this team has done this is they are working with a well-known program called Exploring Computer Science. This course was developed specifically with the intent of broadening participation in early high school computer science classes in the United States. And so they have created an e-textiles project that integrates directly into that program. And they found that it's highly engaging not only for students but also for teachers. They find it challenging, and they really see meaning and connection and value in, instead of technology for the sake of technology, it's interesting, meaningful projects in kind of a makerspace environment that use technology as well, which actually broadens participation for students. And so the idea, take home here, is that art has a tremendous potential to increase access and broaden participation in computer science. And if you're interested in finding this, if you just Google stitching the loop, there's an entire module of this curriculum in the ECS curriculum. It's all freely available, and it's appropriate, as I said, really for kind of early high school.
So the next project is out of UMass, and this was with Rick Adrian and Florence Sullivan. And what they were looking at doing is addressing computer science and computational thinking. And computational thinking, what they kind of termed that as was really how do you break apart problems into different processes. So it could include patterns, decomposition, abstraction, algorithms, things of that nature. And they wanted to look at how did they address their elementary standards, particularly kindergarten and third grade teachers. So what they did is they took teachers and they took cohort groups. So the first group, I think, had 4 teachers in kindergarten, and they worked together with them in order to develop lesson plans, and then they implemented those lesson plans, revised them, and then the next group of kindergarten teachers took over. And so they also did that with third grade. One of the things that they did this with by doing observations and also videos and interviews, a lot of really rich data. What they found was that the teachers integrated this to their already existing lessons, which they found to be really quite powerful because the teachers were able to expand on what they were doing. And in terms of computational thinking, they really focused on writing algorithms or instructions, which is really fantastic for elementary students. Also then creating programs and then debugging those programs. So those seem to be the primary concepts that they covered. Some of the issues that arose, for example, is that they found out they needed to differentiate. So they had quite a large population of Puerto Rican immigrants, and they had never seen snow before. So when their algorithm was their instruction was give me an algorithm for how to create a snowman, obviously Puerto Rican students had a little bit more difficulty without ever seen snow before and creating a snowman. So really thinking about how are we differentiating for our students, what's the population, that was something that they really drew upon for their results. Based on what they found is most teachers seem to be drawn to this idea of algorithms because again, the importance of writing clear and concise instructions is prevalent in so many different domains, English language arts, science, social studies, math, all of these really focus and algorithms can be advantageous for that, so they saw that piece of it. The other piece of it was really working with university faculty members and researchers in this area. They felt that that was a really big benefit for them because they were able to design more engaging instruction that encouraged more discourse with their students. And so now this is my project, which I was really excited to be funded for this. In Indiana, we have basically, within the United States, we each have our own set of standards. So within Indiana, our standards at the elementary level, we're the only state in the United States currently that tests computer science at the elementary level. So our teachers were initially freaked out about this, which I totally understand. But what we wanted to do is instead of looking at the elementary curriculum that will typically do like a game-based type of thing where it walks them through coding the Angry Bird to get to the pig, which is a great problem, but it's not super motivating, especially as we're talking about girls. So we really wanted to investigate how can we create a curriculum that would be socially relevant for students where they're taking computer science and solving a problem that means something to them. Will that increase their interest level? Will that increase their understanding of CS? So we introduced this project that has, first of all, we did a little bit of block-based coding, and also some unplugged activities in order to get them to understand some of the basic fundamental elements of computer science. And then they eventually, we took them into a problem-based learning unit where we investigated the question, how can you create a culture of kindness in your school? And just along the lines of like bullying, all of the other pieces that go along with cyberbullying too, we thought this was really specifically spectacular for this group because because they were 11-year-olds in 6th grade about to go off to middle school, where there's a higher increase of bullying and all of those additional elements. So the students really took to the project just investigating how do we create a culture of kindness in our school, and then they were charged with creating an app. So here's one of the apps.
How are you feeling?
So this one says, how are you feeling today?
Tell me a little bit about the app and why it promotes a culture of kindness.
So the purpose is basically like if a kid or really anybody was going to use this app, it's like if they were just having a really rough time with anything, like if they were just like really stressed or like, you know, all that stuff, they could choose whatever they're feeling. And when you click it, it will say like, oh, it'll be okay. And it just shows them that like it's gonna be okay and that, you know, all that stuff. And you can also say like if you were, you know, using the app, you could just like know that if this was on the App Store, you could say like, oh, now that I'm using this app, I know that someone else is probably using it too at the same time. And so you can know that someone else is also doing it and probably, you know, feeling the same as you, and you know you're not alone and everything. And yeah, and it helps the culture of kindness, because if someone was, you know, really, really stressed or just like having a really, really rough time, they could just go in and it could help them. So, yeah. So how are you feeling?
So it gives a little message, take a deep breath, and then it'll return back to the other screen.
All right, do you guys want to try it?
So one of the things that we found, and they created choose your own adventure apps, they included quizzes, and some of them did kindness trackers so that they could track kind activities that were done in their school. So based on our results, we found that overall their pretest scores are in blue there. The post-scratch, so where we just did block-based coding, is in orange, and then after the PBL project, it is in gray. And this was done over the course of a year, so the really fantastic part is that it didn't go down after the actual project, so it shows that they are applying those skills and knowledge. The interest piece, it was really fascinating, because even though many of our girls said that they were more interested in computer science in our surveys, when I interviewed different populations of students, the females said, well, this is great, I liked computer science, but I still don't know how it would apply to my future careers. Like, what would that look like? What would different problems that I could actually solve? So that's one of the things that we're working on with our curriculum, is to try and show the relevance within with everyday problems. The elementary teachers faced problems, so they were really nervous about the content, first of all, and especially since they were going to be judged on this with student testing. That was something that they were particularly concerned about. And the idea about us collaborating with them, that really worked out to be quite well, again, similar to that first project. So if one of the things is you're asking yourself, how could I get involved in CS K-12 education, working with a teacher or collaborating with a teacher, that could be one of the really great ways to start getting involved and impacting your local community.
Great. And our last project is the one we're working on in Texas, called Project Rocks, Rural Opportunities in CS, me and my colleague Jace Warner. And Texas is a lot like Australia, actually. We have these kind of urban centers, but then we have a massive amount of rural and remote space as well. And so our challenge was really, we need to figure out how do we scale up this capacity building across very wide geographic rural space. And we have what we use in a collective impact model, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So we wanted to evaluate that, was that effective? And then also to develop a framework to systemically and objectively examine equity in CS education. Because as we're scaling up in this CS for All movement, it's super important that we continue to keep equity at the front and center, because if we don't, we may be scaling up but actually seeing women, underrepresented minorities, or low-income students actually falling behind in percentages. So we wanted to create a framework that researchers across the country could use in order to keep equity front and center. And really, has anybody ever heard of collective impact before? Okay, so collective impact model is really based on this idea that when you have these large-scale social challenges, which many challenges in education fit the bill, you really need cross-sector collaboration, and that's not typically the way we do things in education. Typically we like say, silver bullet, we're going to do this intervention and then we're going to control for everything else, and then we're surprised when nothing works. This is really the idea of creating an ecosystem of support. So what we have in Texas is the University of Texas at Austin serves as the backbone organization. That's one of the key features of a collective impact model. And then we have this network of computer science collaboratives, which are made universities, industry people, nonprofits, instructional specialists all over the state. We all have a common agenda: increasing access and broadening participation in computer science. We have continuous communication that's managed in large part by UT Austin, the backbone. We have consistent and shared measurement systems, so we're all targeting the same goals and measuring them the same way. And then mutually reinforcing activities where each of these entities that has a grant from us and as part of the network, they have skills, expertise, knowledge, and resources that they can use in their region, but they can also access the expertise and knowledge and resources of UT or of their partners in the network. And so in order to determine, is this an effective model for actually scaling up capacity in computer science education, we deployed what was called an interrupted time series analysis, which is kind of a quasi-experimental design, before our We Teach CS collaborative approach, and then afterwards is the intervention phase. And what you look for is there a change in slope, or is there a change in intercept to see did your intervention, the collective impact model, make a difference? And you can see we had a fairly significant change in slope, and we were looking specifically at building teacher capacity, getting teachers certified to teach high school computer science. Before the intervention of We Teach CS, less than one teacher a month in the state was getting certified. Afterwards, about 7 teachers a month. And when we broke that down by urban and rural, we found that we were uniquely effective in these rural populations, in large part because we would have rural teachers who literally, they were the only person in a 200-mile radius that taught computer science. Without this collective impact model where they were with a cohort of teachers in their region, they would have felt completely on their own. And then we also used a comparison group to increase our causal analysis, which was technology apps. And we saw no change there, so we thought that lended credence to that. That our collective impact model was the thing that was making the difference. And then when we looked at this framework for looking at equity, we felt like there's really these 4 different levels. There's capacity for CS education, that's like teachers, funding, all of those things. Access to CS education, do schools even offer a course? Participation in CS education, that's kind of like student enrollment. And then experiences of CS education, those are kind of the outcomes. And we feel like if you're not looking at equity at every single one of those levels, you can't wait for the lagging indicators like test scores of high school students or how many actually go on to major in CS. You've got to start way back here at the capacity side. If you're looking at capacity, are you actually getting more teachers of color? Are you getting more teachers who work in low-income schools certified? If you're looking at access, which types of schools are offering CS, and do they have similar levels of access? And in participation, who's actually enrolling, males at females, et cetera. And so these are just examples of how we then, through the lens of equity, look at capacity, access, and participation and experience. And I won't go into detail because we're running out of time, but I'm happy to talk with you in more detail about how you can examine those things. And if you have any questions, these are our Twitter handles and our emails, and we're happy to answer.
Okay, we have just time for just one question, and fortunately we've got a break after, so Carol and Anne will be available to answer any questions then too. But thank you both very much for a really great talk. It's great to see what research is taking place to be able to figure out how we can ensure that we've got mechanisms to educate our next generation and indeed the people of that are in industry at the moment on the best practice of getting them into computer science. I'm certainly going to, I've got a project with my son at home on addressing school values, so I'm going to weave some computer science into that.
Very good.
Any questions? Just one? Carol and Anne, thank you so much for travelling such a long way and sharing your knowledge with us.